I've been playing the piano for the wealthy for almost 15 years now. Ever since graduating from Juilliard with a degree I couldn't afford and debt I couldn't manage, I found that my classical training was best suited for providing ambiance to those who viewed Bach and Chopin as mere background to their conversations about stock portfolios and vacation homes. My name is Everett Carlyle. I am, or was, a pianist for the elite. I've played in penthouses overlooking Central Park, in Hampton's estates with ocean views that stretch to forever, on yachts anchored off the coast of Monaco, and in ballrooms where a single chandelier cost more than what most people make in 5 years. I'm writing this because I need to document what happened. I need to convince myself that I didn't imagine it all, though God knows I wish I had. I've been having trouble sleeping. Every time I close my eyes, I see their faces. I hear the sounds. I smell I'm getting ahead of myself. It started 3 weeks ago with an email from a name I didn't recognize, Thaddeus Wexler. The subject line read, "Exclusive engagement, substantial compensation." This wasn't unusual. Most of my clients found me through word of mouth or my website, and the wealthy often lead with money as if it's the only language that matters. Usually, they're right. The email was brief and formal. "Mr. Carlyle, your services have been recommended by a mutual acquaintance for a private gathering of considerable importance. The engagement requires absolute discretion and will be compensated at $25,000 for a single evening's performance. Should you be interested, please respond to confirm your availability for April 18th. A car will collect you at 7 p.m. sharp. Further details will be provided upon your agreement to our terms. Regards, Thaddeus Wexler, the Ishtar Society." $25,000 for one night. I'd played for billionaires who balked at my usual rate of $2,000. This was either a joke or, I wasn't sure what else it could be. But curiosity got the better of me, and the balance in my checking account didn't hurt either. I responded the same day. To my surprise, I received a call within an hour from a woman who identified herself only as Miss Harlow. Her voice was crisp, professional, with that particular cadence that comes from years of managing difficult people and situations. "Mr. Carlyle, thank you for your prompt response. Mr. Wexler was confident you would be interested in our offer. Before we proceed, I must emphasize the importance of discretion. The event you will be attending is private in the truest sense of the word." "I understand. I played for many private events. Confidentiality is standard in my contracts." "This goes beyond standard confidentiality, Mr. Carlyle. The guests at this gathering value their privacy above all else. You will be required to sign additional agreements, including an NDA with substantial penalties." Something about her tone made me pause. There was an edge to it, a warning barely contained beneath the professional veneer. "What exactly is this event?" I asked. "An annual meeting of the Ishtar Society. It's a philanthropic organization with a long history. The evening includes dinner, speeches, and a ceremony. Your role is to provide accompaniment throughout." "What kind of music are you looking for?" "Classical, primarily. We'll provide a specific program closer to the date. Mr. Wexler has requested that you prepare Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, as well as selected pieces by Debussy and Satie." Simple enough requests. Still, something felt off. "And the location?" "A private estate in the Hudson Valley. As mentioned, transportation will be provided. You'll be returned to your residence when the evening concludes." I hesitated, but the thought of $25,000, enough to cover 6 months of my Manhattan rent, pushed me forward. "All right, I'm in." "Excellent. A courier will deliver paperwork tomorrow. Please sign all documents and return them with the courier. Failure to do so will nullify our arrangement." The paperwork arrived as promised, a thick manila envelope containing the most extensive non-disclosure agreement I'd ever seen. It went beyond the usual confidentiality clauses to include penalties for even discussing the existence of the event itself. I would forfeit not just my fee, but potentially face a lawsuit for damages up to $5 million if I breached any terms. There was also a list of instructions. 1. Wear formal black attire. Tuxedo, white shirt, black bow tie. 2. Bring no electronic devices of any kind. 3. Do not speak unless spoken to. 4. Remain at the piano unless instructed otherwise. 5. Play only the music provided in the accompanying program. 6. Do not acknowledge guests unless they acknowledge you first. The last instruction was underlined. What happens at the society remains at the society. The music program was enclosed as well, a carefully curated selection of melancholy and contemplative pieces. Debussy's Clair de Lune, Satie's Ginopody, several Chopin nocturnes and preludes, and Bach's Goldberg variations. All beautiful pieces, but collectively they created a somber, almost funeral atmosphere. I should have walked away then. The money was incredible, yes, but everything about this felt wrong. However, like most people facing a financial windfall, I rationalized. Rich people are eccentric. Their parties are often strange, governed by antiquated rules of etiquette. This would just be another night playing for people who saw me as furniture with fingers. How wrong I was. April 18th arrived. At precisely 7 p.m., a black Suburban with tinted windows pulled up outside my apartment building in Morningside Heights. The driver, a broad-shouldered man with a close-cropped haircut who introduced himself only as Reed, held the door open without a word. The vehicle's interior was immaculate, with soft leather seats and a glass partition separating me from the driver. On the seat beside me was a small box with a card that read, "Please put this on before we reach our destination." Inside was a black blindfold made of heavy silk. This was crossing a line. "Excuse me," I called to the driver. "I wasn't informed about a blindfold." The partition lowered slightly. "Mr. Wexler's instructions, sir. Security protocols. I can return you to your residence if you prefer, but the engagement would be canceled." $25,000. I put on the blindfold. We drove for what felt like 2 hours, though I couldn't be certain. The roads eventually became less smooth. We were no longer on a highway, but winding through what I assumed were rural roads. Finally, the vehicle slowed and came to a stop. I heard gravel crunching beneath tires, then silence as the engine was turned off. "We've arrived, Mr. Carlyle. You may remove the blindfold now." I blinked as my eyes adjusted to the fading daylight. Before me stood what could only be described as a mansion, though that word seemed insufficient. It was a sprawling stone structure that looked like it belonged in the English countryside rather than upstate New York. Gothic in design, with towering spires and large windows that reflected the sunset in hues of orange and red. The grounds were immaculate. Perfectly manicured gardens, stone fountains, and pathways lined with unlit torches. Reed escorted me to a side entrance where we were met by a slender woman in a black dress. Her hair was pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her pale skin. "Mr. Carlyle, I'm Miss Harlow. We spoke on the phone." Her handshake was brief and cold. "The guests will begin arriving shortly. I'll show you to the ballroom where you'll be performing." We walked through service corridors, avoiding what I assumed were the main halls of the house. The decor was old money, old paintings in gilt frames, antique furniture, Persian rugs on hardwood floors. Everything spoke of wealth accumulated over generations. The ballroom was vast, with a ceiling that rose at least 30 feet, adorned with elaborate plasterwork and a chandelier that must have held 100 bulbs. At one end was a raised platform where a gleaming black Steinway grand piano waited. The room was otherwise empty, though dozens of round tables with black tablecloths had been arranged across the polished floor, each set with fine china, crystal, and silver. "You'll play from here," Miss Harlow said, leading me to the piano. "The program is on the stand. Please familiarize yourself with the sequence. Timing is important this evening." I looked at the program again. It was the same selection I'd been practicing, but now each piece had specific timing noted beside it. The Chopin Nocturne was marked for 9:45 p.m., with "critical" written in red beside it. "What happens at 9:45? I asked. Miss Harlow's expression didn't change. "The ceremony begins. Mr. Wexler will signal you." She checked her watch. "It's 7:30 now. Guests will begin arriving at 8. There's water on the side table. Please help yourself, but I must remind you not to leave the piano area under any circumstances once the first guest arrives." "What if I need to use the restroom?" "Use it now. Once you're at the piano, you remain there until the evening concludes." "How long will that be?" "Until it's over." Her tone made it clear that was all the information I would receive. "One final thing, Mr. Carlyle. No matter what you see or hear tonight, you are to continue playing. Do not stop until Mr. Wexler indicates the evening has concluded. Is that clear?" A chill ran through me. What exactly am I going to see or hear? Her eyes met mine, and for a moment, I saw something like pity. "The Ishtar Society has traditions that may seem unusual to outsiders. Your job is to play, not to understand. Remember that, and you'll leave with your fee and without complications." With that cryptic warning, she left me alone in the massive room. I sat at the piano, testing the keys. The instrument was perfectly tuned, responsive in a way that only comes from regular maintenance by master technicians. Under different circumstances, I would have been thrilled to play such a fine piano. Over the next half hour, staff began to enter. Servers in formal attire, security personnel positioned discreetly around the perimeter, and technicians adjusting lighting. No one spoke to me or even looked in my direction. At precisely 8 p.m., the main doors opened and the first guests began to arrive. They entered in pairs and small groups, all impeccably dressed in formal evening wear. The men in tailored tuxedos, the women in gowns that likely cost more than most cars. But what struck me immediately was how they moved, with a practiced grace that seemed almost choreographed, and with expressions that betrayed neither joy nor anticipation, but something closer to solemn reverence. I began to play as instructed, starting with Bach's Goldberg variations. The acoustics in the room were perfect, the notes resonating clearly throughout the space. As I played, I observed the guests. They were uniformly affluent, but diverse in age and ethnicity. Some I recognized: a tech billionaire known for his controversial data mining practices, a former cabinet secretary who'd left politics for private equity, the heiress to a pharmaceutical fortune, a film director whose work had grown increasingly disturbing over the years. They mingled with practiced smiles that never reached their eyes. Servers circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres, but I noticed that many guests barely touched either. There was an air of anticipation, of waiting. At 8:30, a hush fell over the room as a tall, silver-haired man entered. Even from a distance, his presence commanded attention. This, I assumed, was Thaddeus Wexler. He moved through the crowd, accepting deferential nods and brief handshakes. He didn't smile either. The dinner was served at precisely 8:45. just as I transitioned to Debussy. The conversation during the meal was subdued, lacking the usual animated chatter of high society gatherings. These people weren't here to network or be seen. They were here for something else. At 9:30, as I began Satie's first Janupadi, the doors opened again. A new group entered, but these were not guests. They were different. About 20 people filed in, escorted by security personnel. They were dressed in simple white clothing, loose pants and tunics that looked almost medical. They moved uncertainly, some stumbling slightly. Their expressions ranged from confusion to mild fear. Most notably, they looked ordinary, not wealthy, not polished, regular people who seemed completely out of place in this setting. The guests watched their entrance with an intensity that made my fingers falter on the keys. I quickly recovered, forcing myself to focus on the music rather than the bizarre scene unfolding before me. The newcomers were led to the center of the room where they stood in a loose cluster, looking around with increasing unease. Some attempted to speak to their escorts, but were met with stony silence. At 9:43, Thaddeus Wexler rose from his seat at the central table. The room fell completely silent except for my playing. He raised a crystal glass filled with dark red liquid. "Friends," his voice was deep and resonant, "we gather once more in service to the great balance. For prosperity, there must be sacrifice. For abundance, there must be scarcity. For us to rise, others must fall. It has always been so. It will always be so." The guests raised their glass in unison. "To the balance," they intoned. Wexler turned to face the group in white. "You have been chosen to serve a purpose greater than yourselves. Your sacrifice sustains our world. For this we are grateful." I was now playing Chopin's Nocturne, the piece marked critical on my program. My hands moved automatically while my mind raced to understand what was happening. Sacrifice? What did that mean? One of the people in white, a middle-aged man with thinning hair, stepped forward. "You said this was about a job opportunity. You said—" A security guard moved swiftly, pressing something to the man's neck that made him crumple to his knees, gasping. Wexler continued as if there had been no interruption. "Tonight we renew our covenant. Tonight we ensure another year of prosperity." As the nocturne reached its middle section, the mood in the room shifted palpably. The guests rose from their tables and formed a circle around the confused group in white. Each guest produced a small obsidian knife from inside their formal wear. My blood ran cold, but I kept playing. Miss Harlowe's words echoed in my mind. "No matter what you see or hear tonight, you are to continue playing." "Begin," Wexler commanded. What happened next will haunt me until my dying day. The guests moved forward in unison, each selecting one of the people in white. There was a moment of confused struggle before the guards restrained the victims. Then, with practiced precision, each guest made a small cut on their chosen victim's forearm, collecting drops of blood in their crystal glasses. This wasn't a massacre as I had initially feared. It was something more ritualized, more controlled, but no less disturbing. The people in white were being used in some sort of blood ritual, their fear and confusion providing a stark contrast to the methodical actions of the wealthy guests. After collecting the blood, the guests returned to the circle, raising their glasses once more. "With this offering, we bind our fortunes," Wexler intoned. "With their essence, we ensure our ascension." The guests drank from their glasses, all of them. They drank the blood of strangers as casually as one might sip champagne. I felt bile rise in my throat, but forced myself to continue playing. The nocturne transitioned to its final section, my fingers trembling slightly on the keys. The people in white were led away, looking dazed and frightened. I noticed something else, small bandages on their arms, suggesting this wasn't the first collection they had endured. As the last notes of the nocturne faded, Wexler turned to face me directly for the first time. His eyes were dark, calculating. He gave a small nod, and I moved on to the next piece as instructed. The remainder of the evening proceeded with a surreal normalcy. The guests resumed their seats, dessert was served, and conversation gradually returned, though it remained subdued. No one mentioned what had just occurred. No one seemed disturbed by it. It was as if they had simply performed a routine business transaction rather than participated in a blood ritual. I played mechanically, my mind racing. Who were those people in white? Where had they come from? What happened to them after they were led away? The questions pounded in my head in rhythm with the music. At 11:30, Wexler rose again. "The covenant is renewed. Our path is secured for another year. May prosperity continue to flow to those who understand its true cost." The guests applauded politely, then began to depart in the same orderly fashion they had arrived. Within 30 minutes, only Wexler, Miss Harlow, and a few staff remained in the ballroom. Wexler approached the piano as I finished the final piece on the program. "Excellent performance, Mr. Carlyle. Your reputation is well deserved." His voice was smooth, cultured. "Thank you," I managed, struggling to keep my expression neutral. "May I ask what I just witnessed?" A slight smile curved his lips. "You witnessed nothing, Mr. Carlyle. That was our arrangement. You played beautifully, and now you will return home, $25,000 richer, with nothing but the memory of providing music for an exclusive gathering." "Those people are participating in a medical trial," he interrupted smoothly. "Quite voluntarily, I assure you. They're compensated generously for their contributions, much as you are for yours." I didn't believe him, couldn't believe him, but I also understood the implicit threat in his words. I had signed their documents. I had agreed to their terms. "Of course," I said. "I was merely curious about the unusual ceremony." "Curiosity is natural," Wexler replied. "Acting on it would be unwise. I trust you understand the difference." Miss Harlow appeared at his side, holding an envelope. "Your payment, Mr. Carlyle, as agreed. The car is waiting to take you back to the city." I took the envelope, feeling its substantial weight. "Thank you for the opportunity." "Perhaps we'll call on you again," Wexler said, though his tone made it clear this was unlikely. "Remember our terms, Mr. Carlyle. What happens at the society remains at the society," I finished. "Indeed. Good night." Reed was waiting by the same black Suburban. Once again, I was asked to don the blindfold for the return journey. As we drove through the night, I clutched the envelope containing my fee and tried to process what I had witnessed. It wasn't until I was back in my apartment, counting the stacks of $100 bills, that the full impact hit me. I ran to the bathroom and vomited until there was nothing left. $25,000. The price of my silence. The cost of my complicity. I've spent the past 3 weeks trying to convince myself that there was a reasonable explanation for what I saw. That Wexler was telling the truth about medical trials. That the whole thing was some elaborate performance art for the jaded ultra-wealthy. But I know better. Those people in white weren't volunteers. Their confusion and fear were genuine, and the way the guests consumed their blood with such reverence such practiced ease. This wasn't their first ceremony. I've tried researching the Ishtar Society, but found nothing. Not a mention, not a whisper. As if it doesn't exist. I've considered going to the police, but what would I tell them? That I witnessed rich people drinking a few drops of blood in a ritual? Without evidence, without even being able to say where this mansion was located, who would believe me? And then there's the NDA. $5 million in penalties. They would ruin me, and based on what I saw, financial ruin might be the least of my concerns if I crossed them. So I've remained silent until now. Writing this down is a risk, but I need to document what happened before I convince myself it was all a dream. Last night, I received another email. Mr. Carlyle, your services are requested for our winter solstice gathering on December 21st. The compensation will be doubled for your return engagement. A car will collect you at 7 p.m. The Society was pleased with your performance and discretion. Regards, Thaddeus Wexler, the Ishtar Society. $50,000 for one night of playing piano while the elite perform their blood rituals. I should delete the email. I should move apartments, change my name, disappear. But $50,000. And a part of me, a dark, curious part I never knew existed, wants to go back, to understand what I witnessed, to know what happens to those people in white after they're led away, to learn what the great balance truly means. I have until December to decide. Until then, I'll keep playing at regular society parties, providing background music for the merely wealthy rather than the obscenely powerful. I'll smile and nod and pretend I'm just a pianist, nothing more. But every time I close my eyes, I see Wexler raising his glass. I hear his words about sacrifice and balance, and I wonder, how many others have been in my position? How many witnessed the ceremony and chose money over morality? How many returned for a second performance? And most troubling of all, if I do go back, will I ever be allowed to leave again? The winter solstice is approaching. I have a decision to make. The Ishtar Society is waiting for my answer.